Okay, so I think we are recording. So for the people who want to review it, they can do it. Okay, so let me share my presentation that will help me to say what I have to say, and then we can start. So as we said today, we speak about the Surrealism, which is a movement that took place in France mainly, but not only in France. So then we have many other artists from other countries, and we will see a few of them. So the word surrealism came from this phrase from Guillaume Apollinaire. So Guillaume Apollinaire was a writer, a French poet, very important at the beginning of the last century in Paris, and he was actually not originally from France because his father was Italian, but then he is one of the most important figure in Paris because he, together with some others, was the one who reunited many important artists of that time, like Pablo Picasso, like many others that were all together in Montmartre in Paris, no? In the first 20 years of the last century. So the term surrealist comes from this phrase, and let's read it in French. I try, okay? So, tout bien examiné, je crois en effet qu'il vaut mieux adopter surréalisme que surnaturalisme, que j'avais d'abord employé, no? Oh. So basically, it's a contraction of the original name of surnaturalism, so supernaturalism. And this phrase was pronounced when he was in charge of the program of this important theater event that took place in 1917, first of all in Paris, and it's called Le Ballet Russe de Sergei Diaghilev. And this is extremely important. This is a very important event because to this theater work, many important people participated. First of all, we had Guillaume Apollinaire in charge of the organization. Then Jean Cocteau, who was another very important person who was a friend of many important artists. He was the playwright. And then we had the musician. The music were composed by Eric Satie. And then, of course, you know, this curtain of the theater is extremely important. I had the privilege to see it in real once in Venice. Today, if you want, you can see it in the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And this is the biggest work we have painted by Pablo Picasso. So this is the curtain of this theater event. And this is considered also the very first surrealist work in the art history. So a very important event. This work really comes for what is called the pink period of Pablo Picasso. And it's one of the most creative period that we have from the great artists of the last century. So again, this phrase was pronounced during this event, and this is also considered the very beginning of the surrealistic movement. Guillaume Apollinaire, just for you to know, as you can see here, he died quite young from the Spanish flu, which was the pandemic they had at that time, 1 century ago. Okay, so that was the COVID of that time. So having said that, the surrealism actually, we can consider it as an evolution of what was called the Dadaism. The Dadaism was a movement that took place at the very beginning in the neutral Switzerland, in Zurich. And, you know, it was a movement against, you know, against everything. It was against the war. It was against the way the art had expressed so far. So it was very, I would say, transgressive. It was, you know, the goal of the movement was to shock the people, you know, with a new way of expressing the art. So this is some results of that. So we have to say that probably the most important artist of this movement is Marcel Duchamp. And this is a work, for instance, of him. So this is a urinal that he called the fountain, no? La Fontana, okay? So this is also the famous Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci with mustache, right? And this is a famous photo by Man Ray, who was a photographer of the time, an American photographer. So this is a woman, a beautiful woman transformed in a violin, right? And also here we have a picture of an exhibition that took place here in Milano, where I'm speaking, and that was dedicated to this movement. So the Dadaism, as I said, was already a kind of surrealistic movement, but with no direction, basically. It was only against everything, you know, against the war, against the fascism, against the communism. It was against everything. Also against the art academy they had so far. So only with André Breton, he is considered the most important theorist of the Surrealism. He was the man who gave a direction to the Dadaist movement, and he was the theorist that, giving a direction to the Dadaist movement, he invented the Surrealism. So the Surrealism, of course, again, is a movement that wants to express, of course, a revolution, like the Dadaism was doing, but now with a direction. First of all, the Surrealism is very much influenced by the theories of Sigmund Freud. André Breton was a heavy reader of the Sigmund Freud, in particular the interpretation of dreams. And of course, with the Surrealism, the artist wanted to give freedom to the unconscious to express himself, right? And not only that, also the theories of Karl Marx, you know, the dialectic, the Marx dialectic in philosophy was very much influencing this movement. This picture I found on Inter is extremely meaningful. So here we have together André Breton here on the right, while here on the left, if you recognize him, this is Diego Rivera. He was a famous Mexican artist. He was actually also I don't know if he was the husband, but certainly the boyfriend of Frida Kahlo. I know you love the paintress. And the one here in the middle, he's Trotsky, you know, the Soviet politician. So they were together in Mexico City, and this is a very meaningful picture, right? Because it tells a lot about the ideas of André Breton, that he was clearly a left ideas artist. Artist. He was more kind of a promoter, right? He was a writer, he was a poet, he was a playwright as well, but certainly he did his best by promoting the movement, right? He was the one who really united all the artists of the Surrealist movement. Surrealism is not only in painting, right? We have a Surrealist movies and also photography. As I said, Man Ray is a famous photographer. He was American. He's a famous Surrealist photographer. And then we have in the cinema, in the movie, we have the Spanish Luis Buñuel, and a famous movie by him is Ancien Andalou. And you can see this movie on YouTube if you want. You have the entire movie you can see. This is probably the most important product we have from the Surrealist movie tradition. Then another example is Le Testament d'Orphée. The writer was again Jean Cocteau. You can see him here together with Pablo Picasso, and here we have a young Lucia Bosé, the Spanish actress. So this is other type of expressions we have from the Surrealist movement. And then we have a Surrealist theater and music as well. Typical example are the Surrealist theater by Antonin Artaud, who was also a quite important actor, you know, not only a playwright, but also an actor. And he was one of the most important figure of the theater, what is called the theater of cruelty. And then we have Federico Garcia Lorca in Spain. Also, he produced some works in theater works in his country. You probably know that Federico Garcia Lorca was then killed during the civil war in Spain. So he is a lovely artist, not only for the theater but also for poetry. He was a great poet. And then also in music, I already mentioned Erik Satie. Erik Satie is considered a very important Surrealist musician. But to come to our presentation, and especially to our people from Belgium we have today, let's talk more about some artists very connected to this movement. So certainly extremely important artist we have of this movement was René Magritte, right? And René Magritte was born in Belgium. So he was originally not exactly from Brussels, but in the nearby, not far from Brussels, closer maybe to Charleroi. And this is a famous phrase of him, right? We will say more about this phrase, because in this phrase is summarized all his ideas about what he wanted to say with his heart, right? So right here we have a subject that he repeated several times, right? This is called the lovers, and we can see here the two lovers with a towel covering their faces, their heads, right? So we have some explanation about that. Why did René Magritte replicated several times this type of subject? Well, it happened that when he was, well, we have an explanation, we can try to guess, but when he was young, he was around 12, 14 years old, his mother suicided in the river of his town, and then she was found, of course, she was found basically dead, covered by a night dress. So she was covered by a night dress. Though this is possibly the reason why Magritte, he was so shocked by this view of his mother that this is considered why he several times replicated this type of subject. But not only for that, because we will see that it's also very much in line with these theories, with these ideas. But even starting from here, we can see that Magritte, the way he painted is extremely simple, right? So we can say that it was kind of childish way of painting, right? The reason of that is because he was not really interested at all in trying to give an interpretation to the reality. And neither he was interested in trying to represent the reality. That was not his own goal, right? So that's why his kind of painting is, I would say, very simple, very basic, somehow childish, but there is certainly a very important reasons of that. Here we have a portrait of Magritte in the background with a famous painting by him. And he lived, you know, he was born at the end of the 19th century, and then he died in 67. He died in Brussels, actually. Here we have the most important work of René Magritte. If you fly to Brussels, if you go to the Brussels airport, you can see this picture everywhere, right? On chocolates, on everywhere. So, and the title of this painting is "Ceci n'est pas un pipe," no? This phrase we see here was pronounced by Magritte himself. So he said, "Who would dare to claim that the image of a pipe is a pipe? Is a pipe, sorry, we are talking in English. Who could smoke the pipe of my painting? Nobody. So it's not a pipe, right?" So this is very meaningful what he had in mind. Whatever we try to represent, in this case it's clearly a pipe, right? It has nothing to do with the reality, right? So this is not a pipe, simply because I cannot smoke with this pipe, right? To say it very simply. So let's move forward. So the very first well-known work we have from Magritte is called Les Giochi Perdus. I apologize with the French-speaking people, but my French is quite basic. We have to say first that Magritte was very much influenced by the Italian painter De Chirico, right? De Chirico, the work you see here is a famous painting by De Chirico, and he's also known as the painter of the metaphysics, so he's very conceptual. But in this case, as you can see here, this famous painting is called Canto d'Amore. It's already a surrealist painting. If you have a look, of course, we have many elements typical of the metaphysics representation, which was his specialty, right? But already, as you can see here, we have this globe, this board right here, this head from a sculpture. So it's a kind of surrealist painting already, right? So that was probably the most influencing work we had for René Magritte and the production he had in the following years. So here already we have some famous works by Magritte. Here we have what is called in Italian La Voce dei Venti. So here we are in the 30s. In the 30s, he painted this type of, so he's already a complete surrealist painter. And so what's the idea here? The idea is to basically represent objects that are totally disconnected from basically the place we would expect they would to find them, right? So here we have three rattles in the air, up in the air, very big. So here below we have a landscape with the seaside on, And so this is an example of a very surrealist representation. Here, this one on the right, it's called the human condition. It's very, you know, the idea of Magritte was to leave us as observers totally puzzled, right? We remain totally puzzled by this type of representation. So here, look at here, we have a window, and then we have of course, a landscape, an hilly landscape. But here in front, before the window, we have a canvas, right? A canvas basically represented the same landscape. So here, it's like he's joking with us, right? So we have the feeling that, okay, we are seeing the landscape, but then we have a painting in front, but it's the same landscape. So we are confused, right? We are in total confusion. So he definitely liked very much to play a game with the observer, no? To basically free the observers from any type of automatic assumption he would have done, right? So here we have two other important paintings. Here on the left, we have what is called La Clairvoyance. And here we have probably himself, painting himself while painting a board. So this type of painting reminds a lot of what we have seen, those of you who have seen with me the famous work by Velázquez, who was called Las Meninas. That was the same idea. So the painter representing himself painting, right? So, and here we have another strange situation. This is called La Chiave dei Campi. So we have a broken glass here, and here we have all the broken glassing that brought together all the pieces of landscapes here. So also here we are totally confused. No? We don't know what we are exactly seeing. So is this landscape real? Was that only an illusion? Is this one on the glass is the landscape? So we are totally puzzled, right? So that is the idea of Magritte. In some way, he was joking with us, right? Here we have other example. This work is quite famous as well. It's called false mirror. So we can guess this is an eye. This is an eye basically in the middle of the sky, you know, or maybe this is the sky trying to mirroring in the eye of this person. So this is we have a double interpretation, right, of this situation. This was we have mentioned the player, the film director Luis Buñuel. He was so impressed and so by this painting, he decided to use it in a famous scene in the movie Ancien Andalou. If you want to see that movie, you will see a scene with this painting in the scene. Here we have another funny representation. This is called Hegel's Holidays. Here we are in 1958. So this is another strange representation. Magritte did like very much the philosophy. He was an heavy reader of philosophy, and in particular, he knew very much Hegel. Hegel was extremely popular in France at the beginning of last century. So all the cultural environment in France considered very much Hegel, especially after the interpretation they had by Alexandre Kojève, who did very extremely important lessons on lectures on Hegel in Paris. So he was a philosopher that who really influenced very much the entire French culture of that time. And those of you who are familiar with the Hegel theories probably know that he was very famous because of the dialectic, you know, the Hegelian dialectic was very famous. So Magritte, here he tried to represent this theory of Hegel. So here we have an umbrella basically rejecting the water, but at the same time we have a glass containing the water. So this is typical representation of a dialectic situation in which we have a thesis, antithesis, and then a synthesis altogether. He thought that if Hegel could have seen this work, he would have liked it very much, and probably would have laughed as well. And so that's why he called the painting this way. Here we have other typical paintings by Magritte, and very unique, very particular. So here we have a painting which is called Il Castello dei Pirenei, the Pyrenei Castle. And here we have the opposition of lightness and heaviness. So we have a big stone here. We have the idea that big stone with a castle on top. We have the idea of lightness, of something that we would expect to be extremely heavy, right? Extremely heavy. It's up in the air, no? It's up in the air together with the clouds. And here we have the sea. Here, same thing. He represents a battle, La Battaglia delle Argonne. And here we have a cloud that probably give us some ideas of heaviness. And while here on the right, we have a big stone giving us the idea probably of light. And so it's a totally, you know, it's the idea of totally changing, you know, the meanings we would expect of something we are seeing here on the painting. Also here we have a situation in which we have the night and the day all together. So the sky is clearly a daylight sky, while here the house and the trees is a typical picture from the night. So the daylight and the nightlight are all together. Here we have another subject which is quite important for Magritte, because again, to emphasize the idea that what we see in a representation, it is never the truth, right? It is never the reality. So here we have the idea of a bird in front of a face, just to underline that behind there is always something you have to discover. So in this case, you have clearly a bird, but even if you can see a face, there is probably something behind you have to discover, right? Because what you see is never the reality, right? You have to discover it. And now I would spend a few words on something that, in my opinion, is probably the most important part of this presentation, because it tells a lot about the ideas of Magritte. As I said, he was very interested in philosophy, and there was an extremely interesting dialogue between these two men. So on the left we have René Magritte, on the right we have the smiling, smart philosopher whose name was Michel Foucault, and he was a brilliant thinker of his time. He wrote a famous book I recommend all of you to read if you have any kind of interest. The book name is Les mots et les choses, which in English would be The Words and the Things. We already mentioned this philosopher and this work when we talk about Las Meninas, because in this book he likes to analyze some artworks, and among them there was also Velázquez. In this case also he spoke a lot about Magritte. So his description was that he tried to basically summarize, you know, what was the history of the art representation. Because, you know, when we speak about Magritte and Surrealism, we are speaking about the way we represent the things. So he said, you know, that for many centuries, the art painting always tried to represent the reality. So there was a total connection between what we represent and, for instance, the title of the painting. So here, for instance, he used the example of this beautiful Edouard Manet work, whose title is Il bar de la Folie Bergère. So, as an observer, we can see that this is clearly a bar, right? This is clearly a bar. We have a bar lady, and we have a bar. So there is a total connection between what we see and what we expect to see, right? This tradition, he said, was totally terminated when we had the very first abstract works. For instance, like abstract works like artists like Kandinsky, right? So for instance, this is a work by Kandinsky. So in this case, as you can see here, the way he represented the things don't let us recognize exactly what is represented. So we can only make some assumptions of what he's representing, right? So here the tradition is completely, we have basically an interruption right here. So there is no more a relationship between what we see, the title of the work, and what we would expect to see by the title of the work. With Magritte, we have something new, you know, something totally new, because with Magritte, what does it happen? You know, it happens that in the Magritte paintings, we can clearly recognize what he is painting. So in this case, for instance, we see, this is a famous painting which is called Golconda. So what we see, we see some houses here, typical, I would say, Belgian, from Belgium, right? Houses from Belgium. And then here we have a kind of reign of men, right? It looks like a reign of men, you know, businessmen, right? So what happens is that we can recognize the figures of the painting, but we cannot actually, he jokes with us. We don't see them where we would expect them to be, right? So this is what happens. So the idea is that the Magritte goal is translating basically into an image the incurable distance that separates reality from representation. He wants to underline that representation cannot replicate the reality, right? The aim is to deceive the viewer's eye, freeing him from the laziness of any automatic perception, right? So he doesn't want us to perform any automatic expression. So here we see the man in the sky. Here we have a painting which is called The Art of Conversation. So here you would expect two people talking together, right? In fact, we have two people. We have to zoom. So you see here, we see two small men talking together, but then the real subject of the paint is this stone-made sculpture with this word rêve, which in French means dream, right? So again, he's joking with us. Here we have another painting which is called Decalcomania. So we have a man here, and here we have the silhouette of a man showing the sky. So, but let me tell you something here, because it's important to understand what he wanted to say. You know, he basically does he likes to clarify the difference between what is a similarity and what is a similitude, right? So he says that he wants to basically introduce a mysterious atmosphere through basically figures. Basically, let me see. I prefer to write to read this phrase and then maybe explain it. You know, Magritte achieves his goal with the two experiences: the mysterious atmosphere that characterizes his works, and the ambiguity of the titles, what I've just said. The atmosphere is mysterious because...
Questo qua, esatto, col cappello, bravo, questo qua, lo ricordo, sì.
Sorry, I need to mute. Okay. The atmosphere is mysterious because the painting is both familiar for the figures it stages and unusual for the juxtaposition of objects and settings. The titles are chosen in such a way that the observer is unable to place the paintings in a familiar region that the automatism of thought would not fail to recall. Even when there seems to be a correspondence between the title and the subject of the painting, other details intervene to complicate the things, which is the case here, you know, with this painting of l'arte della conversazione. Therefore, painting cannot establish relations of similarity between pictorial signs and the real world. Magritte writes, things have no similarities to each other. They have or do not have similitudes. It is only up to the thought of being similar. In conclusion, Magritte's painting is based on irremediable distance between reality and representation. Reality is a dimension that can only be reached by thought, while representation is a world apart, closed in a network of similitudes that can only attempt to investigate the world, but they cannot emulate it. So basically, he said that we cannot represent through similarities the reality, but we can also work on similitude between objects to try to understand the similarities. So this is a typical, this is a work that really give an explanation of that. So here what we have is that we have basically a curtain, we would expect that a curtain totally covers the sea we see behind. But then we have a silhouette with the same shape of the man representing the seaside. So basically the idea is that through the similitude, we are able to understand the reality. Okay, so this is the idea basically. Not so easy, but especially to explain in another language, which is not my language. But hopefully you understood something. Because of me, of course. So to complete what we have said on Magritte, let's talk about a little bit where we can visit Magritte. There is a beautiful Musée Magritte in Brussels, which is the great European city. Here we have this monument, which is very characteristic of the city, which is the Atomium, that was built in 1958. When they organized the expo in Brussels. And here there is a very, very unique representation of the museum. There was some time, I don't know if it is this way, they totally covered the building of the museum with the tent basically replicating the famous works of Magritte. Here we have the rooms inside the museum, and yes, it's definitely something that I haven't visited yet, and I would like to see once in the future, hopefully. Maybe we have Lorena and Sophie walking us through visiting the museum, right?
Of course, Paolo.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, that was Magritte. A few words now on another very important artist of the Surrealist movement, and this artist is Juan Miró. Probably you know him as well. He was such an important artist as well. He was born in Barcelona. So Miró is a Catalan artist. So he was not exact. He was from Spain. But in particular, he was a Catalan. So because we all know that Barcelona is in a region which is called Catalonia, where they have their own culture, their own language. And as you can see here in this picture, he looks like a 80 years old child, right? That is the idea of, that is actually a characteristic of the Miró's works. He he was extremely creative. He was very colorful in his works, and he is also considered probably the most surrealist artist of the entire movement. That was the way he described him, André Breton. So this is a famous phrase we have from him: a simple line painted with the brush can lead to freedom and happiness. And it's true. So freedom and happiness, what he was looking for his entire life. He experienced the wars, right? He experienced the wars. So he was unfortunate to see the First World War between the 15 and the 18 of the last century. Then, of course, he was very much involved with the civil war in Spain that was so cruel, and it was in 1936. And then finally the Second World War. So the very first half of his life was very much influenced by a war environment, right? And so that's why he was looking for freedom and happiness for the entire life, especially during the Civil War. You know that the Catalan people were kind of persecuted by the dictator Franco in Spain. And so that was the time in which he left the country. So he lived for some time in Paris together with the other artists. And that was also the time in which he could grow a lot as an artist, and he learned a lot from other artists. So the very first works we had from Mirò, those are four important works, really remind the Fauve movement. If any one of you are familiar with Henri Matisse works, you know, there is Sophie, who is, maybe Sophie is from south of France. So Matisse was expressing himself very much in the south of France, in Provence. And as you can see here, these works really remind the type of style that Matisse used to paint his works. So this movement, which is called the Fauvism, right? The Fauvism movement. Also here in this first painting, whose name is, I'll tell you immediately, it's called The Portrait of Vincent Nubiola. We can clearly see the influence of Cézanne. This one really reminds a lot, you know, the card players of Cézanne, and also this still life, I can see much work of Cézanne. So this is the very first Mirò we have at the beginning of the last century. So I would say in the 20s of the last century. And then there is a second part of his life, which is categorized under the magical realism of the artist. The magical realism is a movement that took place not only for the painting, but also for the literature, for instance. So we have Lorena Rojas. She probably knows many writers from South America, like, for instance, the famous Garcia Marquez, no?
Yes.
And he is probably the most known writer of the magical, what is called the magical realism movement, no? When he wrote the famous Cien Años de Soledad. And yeah, same thing. So this is the typical style of that movement. So here we have some famous works of Mirò's of that time. So here we have House with Palm Tree, in which we have a lovely view of Catalonia. This is a typical landscape from Catalonia. And then here we have works in which really we can see the influence of the Cubism, you know, that was so popular in France with Pablo Picasso and other famous painters of that time. So here we can see, you know, these are, I would consider them typical cubist works, but with some differences. We see many more colors compared with the French works painted by Picasso. So this is still a difference with Mirò's works, because for the color for Mirò was always so much important, you know. And this one is also a very important work. In this feat, I personally recognize Picasso, you know. It reminds me a lot Guernica, where we can see this type of feat for the women, not only in Guernica, but in other works by Picasso. And this one you see on the right, whose title is The Farm. The Farm. This is a famous painting because it was bought by Ernest Hemingway, you know, the famous American writer. And this phrase is a famous phrase by Ernest Hemingway. And he bought this painting and he said this phrase: it has in it all that you feel about Spain when you are there, and all that you feel when you are away and cannot go there. No one else has been able to paint these two very opposing things. So again, here we have a typical Catalan landscape. Those of you who have been in Catalonia, you can recognize this type of colors which are typical from that area in Spain, in the Barcelona area. Then after this period of what they call magical realism of Juan Miró, we have finally the real surrealism by Miró. So here we have three famous important works by Miró. This one is called the Tilled Field. Then here we have the Catalan landscape, and in brackets, the hunter. So here we have Miró representing a man, which is supposed the hunter, with the geometric figures, right? So we start seeing the Miró we all know, right, from this painting, because Miró became so popular when he started painting like this, right? Still today, he is very much in our imagination, right, since our childhood. And this is another important work of that time, which is called Pastoral. And finally, we have the mature surrealism, right? So the most mature surrealism by Miró. So this painting, for instance, is called the Arlequin Carnival, il Carnevale di Arlecchino. So it's like a music in painting, right? This is kind of a painting singing a song, right? For kids, for children. So there is so much creativity, so many colors. So this is really Miró. Now he becomes Miró in these years when he becomes a mature surrealist painter. Also here we have other famous painting. This one is called Bonheur d'aimer ma brune, that in English would be the happiness of loving my brunette. And this is also very important because this is part of a series of paintings which are called fratellini, with the Italian word. And here to come to the final works we have by Miró, which get more and more abstract, I would say. The last Miró, he becomes very much abstract, and we have some important critics saying that at the very end of his career, he was able to create an artwork maybe by just painting a line or a point, you know. That was the evolution of Miró. And this work is called this one is called The Spanish Dancer. So here we have an abstract representation of a Spanish dancer, suggested, of course, by the colors typical of Spain, which are red, yellow, and black, right? And then, of course, Miró was not only a painter, he became also a very appreciated sculptor. So here we have two examples. This sculpture reminds me very much, you know, the E.T. Of Steven Spielberg, you remember in the movie? And this sculpture is preserved in an open-air museum in the UK, near Manchester, while this one on the right is actually in Milano. So you can see this sculpture in Milano, not very far from the center. I think it's very near to Corso Buenos Aires, in Via Marina, if I well remember, not far from Palestro. So if you want to admire a sculpture by Miró, you can see it in Milano, not far from where we all live. And then, of course, he was also a painter of big, very huge walls. You know, he painted huge surfaces at the very end of his career. This is an example, and here we can see better the size of the surfaces he used to paint at the very end of his career. You can see here his atelier that was a kind of industry, you know, because he needed so much space to paint. Also, you know, he experimented some painting on the wood, like in this case. So basically only using the black, right? So again, with a simple here silhouette, a simple lines, you know, simple spots, he was able to create such a creative representation, such a creative artwork. We all I think admire. So Miró, like Magritte did for Brussels, even more Miró did for Barcelona. So the way Barcelona is today, the way we love it, because we all know how beautiful it is, you know. Certainly, Miró did a lot, contributed a lot to make the city even more beautiful than it used to be, you know. We all know Barcelona for the Gaudí architect works, not right? But also Miró is an important contributor. So here we can see a famous floor mosaic that you can find in the famous Ramblas in Barcelona, which are probably the most important street in Barcelona. And then here we see an abstract sculpture you can find in the Miró garden, because Barcelona dedicated a park to Juan Miró. And this is supposed to represent, of course, in the imagination of the artist, a lady, a woman with a bird. So this is a woman, according to Miró, and this one is holding basically a oiseau, I would say in France, right? And then, of course, this is the airport. In the airport of Barcelona, you can admire such a huge, you know, fresco that was painted by Juan Miró. And finally, I personally had the possibility, when I was in Barcelona, to visit the Miró Foundation. It's on top of the hill of Barcelona. The hill is called Montjuïc. And if you haven't been yet, I strongly recommend you to go. You can see many works by Miró. You can admire a fantastic view of Barcelona from the top of the hill. And there are so many big spaces inside where you can enjoy, you know, the last works of Miró I would say in the best way, because Miró at the very end of his career needed huge spaces to expose his works, and this is what you can find in the foundation in Barcelona. And yes, this is a sculpture on the balcony of the same foundation. And that was it. I think this is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to say more, to discuss more about what we just said. Hopefully, you was enough clear. Are you still there? Can you? I think I need to do something. Maybe unmute.
Yeah, here.
Are you there?
Yes, it was very nice indeed. I really appreciate it.